At my sister's birthday dinner, everyone ordered steak and lobster, then slid the $2,200 bill toward me. Mom said, "You don't have kids, it's the least you can do." I just stood up, tossed down $100, and said, "Then you can split what's left." Walked out smiling. The next morning, 26 missed calls, family group chat exploding, and a voicemail from my dad saying, "You've embarrassed us all." But I didn't care. I, 32M, never thought a birthday dinner would be the moment I finally stopped being the family ATM, but here we are. My sister turned 35 last weekend, and Mom insisted on celebrating at the most expensive steakhouse in town. The kind of place where they don't list prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you shouldn't be there. I should have seen the trap coming from a mile away, but I guess I'm too trusting when it comes to family. The dinner started normally enough. My parents, my sister and her husband, my brother with his wife and their 2 kids, plus my uncle and his family. 12 people total, all squeezed around a massive table while everyone made small talk about work and the weather. I noticed the kids were already restless, and my sister kept checking her phone every few minutes. When the server came around, I ordered the salmon special. Mid-range price, nothing crazy. But then I watched in horror as everyone else went completely overboard. My sister ordered the premium Wagyu steak with lobster tail. Her husband got the same. My brother's family ordered 3 steaks, 2 lobster dinners, and expensive sides for everyone. Even the kids got the premium children's meals that cost more than most adult entrees at normal restaurants. I tried to catch Mom's eye, thinking maybe she'd noticed how expensive everything was getting, but she was busy ordering wine. Not just any wine, either. She pointed to something that made the server's eyebrows raise slightly before he scribbled it down. The worst part was how casual everyone acted about it. My uncle joked about living it up since it was a special occasion. My brother's wife mentioned how they never got to eat at places like this. My sister laughed and said she deserved to be spoiled on her birthday. The whole time, I felt this growing pit in my stomach because I knew where this was heading. Throughout dinner, I tried to enjoy myself, but the conversation kept circling back to money in subtle ways. Someone mentioned how expensive gas was getting. My brother complained about his mortgage payment. My sister talked about wanting to renovate her kitchen but not having the funds. It felt like they were setting the stage for something, and I was the unwitting star of the show. When dessert came around, I declined. I'd already spent enough on my meal and wasn't about to add a $40 piece of chocolate cake to the mix. But everyone else ordered premium desserts, coffee, after-dinner drinks. The server kept coming back with more expensive additions, and nobody seemed concerned about the mounting bill. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. The server approached with the check, and without even looking at it, everyone started that awkward dance of reaching for their wallets while clearly hoping someone else would grab it. The server, probably reading the room, set it down right in the middle of the table. Nobody moved for a solid 30 seconds. I could feel the tension building as everyone avoided eye contact. Finally, my sister reached for it, made a show of opening it, and her face went pale. She whispered the total to my brother's wife, who immediately looked shocked. That's when Mom decided to take charge. She looked directly at me and explained that since I didn't have kids, and since everyone else was struggling with expenses, it would be the least I could do to cover dinner. She made it sound so reasonable, like I was being selfish for not immediately volunteering. The table went quiet. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for my response. My sister tried to look apologetic, but didn't say anything to defend me. My brother just shrugged like it was obvious I should pay. Even my uncle nodded along like Mom was making perfect sense. I looked at that check. $2,200. More than my monthly rent. For one dinner that I hadn't even enjoyed because I'd been too worried about exactly this scenario playing out. Something clicked inside me in that moment. I realized this wasn't just about one dinner. This was about years of being treated like the family bank account. Every time someone needed money for car repairs, or help with rent, or wanted to go somewhere expensive, they came to me. And I always said yes because that's what family does, right? But sitting there, looking around the table at people who'd just spent my entire weekend budget on appetizers, I felt something I'd never felt before. Clarity. I stood up slowly, pulled out my wallet, and counted out 520s. I placed them on the table next to the check and told everyone they could split the remaining $1,900 among themselves. Then I walked out. The silence behind me was deafening, but I kept walking. I could hear chairs scraping and voices starting to rise as I reached the door, but I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. I drove home in complete peace, actually smiling. I ordered pizza, opened a beer, and settled in to watch a movie. For about 3 hours, I enjoyed the most relaxing evening I'd had in months. Then my phone started blowing up. Update 1. The first call came around 11 p.m. It was my sister, and I could tell she'd been crying. She wanted to know how I could embarrass her like that on her birthday, how I could leave everyone scrambling to figure out the bill. I listened for about 30 seconds before hanging up. Then my brother called. He was angry, telling me I'd ruined the entire evening and that everyone had to put the bill on their credit cards. When I asked him why he ordered a $100 steak if he couldn't afford it, he just got more upset and hung up on me. But the calls kept coming. My sister-in-law, my uncle, even my cousin who wasn't even at dinner but had apparently heard all about my selfish behavior through the family grapevine. Each call was the same theme. How could I abandon family like that? How embarrassed they all were, how I needed to make this right. I turned my phone off around midnight and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, I had 26 missed calls and a family group chat that had exploded with over 100 messages. Most of them were variations of the same guilt trips I'd gotten on the phone, but some were getting creative with their anger. The voicemail from Dad was the worst. He said I'd embarrassed the entire family, that my behavior was unacceptable, and that I needed to call him immediately to discuss how I was going to fix this situation. His tone suggested I was a teenager who'd been caught shoplifting, not a grown man who'd refused to pay for other people's expensive dinner. But reading through all those messages and listening to those voicemails, something interesting happened. Instead of feeling guilty, I started feeling angry. Really angry. Because nowhere in any of those messages did anyone acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, they'd been taking advantage of me. Nobody apologized for assuming I'd pay without asking. Nobody seemed to think there was anything wrong with ordering the most expensive items on the menu when someone else was expected to foot the bill. Instead, I was the villain for not playing along with their game. I spent that Sunday morning making a list. Every time in the past 2 years that family members had borrowed money from me. Every dinner I'd paid for. Every time someone had an emergency and needed help with bills. Every vacation where I'd been expected to cover more than my share because I made more money or didn't have kids to worry about. The total was staggering. Over $15,000 in 2 years. And not once had anyone paid me back or even offered to. Update 2. Monday morning, I got a text from Mom asking me to meet her for lunch. She said we needed to talk about what happened and figure out how to move forward as a family. The tone was conciliatory, so I thought maybe she was ready to apologize and have a real conversation about boundaries. I was wrong. She spent the first 10 minutes of lunch explaining to me how hurt everyone was by my actions. How my sister had been crying all weekend. How my brother was stressed about the unexpected expense. How Dad was disappointed in me for causing such a scene. When I tried to explain my side, she cut me off. She said that my attitude had been building for months, that I'd become selfish and distant from the family. She suggested I was jealous of my siblings for having children and a real purpose in life. That's when I realized this lunch wasn't about making things right. It was about getting me back in line. I told her about my list, about the $15,000, about how every family gathering had become an opportunity for someone to ask me for money, about how exhausted I was from being treated like a walking ATM instead of a family member. Mom's response was to tell me that helping family was what adults did, and that my siblings had children and responsibilities I couldn't understand. She said my money problems weren't anyone else's fault, and if I couldn't afford to help family, maybe I needed to budget better. The irony was incredible. She was lecturing me about budgeting while defending people who'd ordered $200 meals they couldn't afford. I finished my sandwich, left money for my meal only, and walked out on her too. That afternoon, I got a call from my brother. He wanted to meet up after work to hash things out man to man. Against my better judgment, I agreed. He started by trying to be reasonable. He acknowledged that maybe they'd been asking for help too often, and maybe they should have been more considerate about expenses at dinner. For a minute, I thought we might actually work things out. Then he got to his real point. He said that as the only one without kids, I had responsibilities to the family that I wasn't meeting. He explained that my income was family income in a way, because we all looked out for each other. He said my refusal to help was putting strain on everyone, especially our parents who worried about their other children struggling financially. I asked him how much he thought I should pay, not just for dinner, but in general. How much of my income belonged to the family? He got uncomfortable with the question, but eventually said that if I could afford it, I should be contributing at least a few $100s a month to help everyone out. After all, he said, what was I going to do with all that money anyway? That's when I understood that this wasn't about one dinner or even about money, really. This was about them believing they had a right to my resources simply because we shared DNA. They'd convinced themselves that my financial independence was somehow unfair and that I owed them compensation for their life choices. I told him I needed to think about everything he'd said, and we parted on what seemed like decent terms. But inside, I was done. Update 3. Over the next few days, I made some decisions that probably sealed my fate with the family, but I've never felt more certain about anything. First, I called my bank and opened a new checking account. I transferred all but a small buffer from my old account, which I'd shared access to with my parents for emergencies. They'd been dipping into it more frequently than I'd realized, always with some crisis that needed immediate attention. Then I changed my phone number. I kept the old one active but set it to forward to voicemail, so I could choose when and if to deal with family communications. Most importantly, I started saying no to everything. No to the family barbecue where I'd traditionally brought all the expensive meat and alcohol. No to helping my sister with her car payment. No to the family vacation planning meeting where they'd undoubtedly expect me to subsidize everyone else's good time. The reaction was swift and predictable. Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced, demanding to know what had gotten into me. When I wouldn't let him in, he stood in the hallway lecturing me about family obligations while my neighbors pretended not to listen. Mom started calling my job, claiming there was a family emergency and she needed to reach me. When my boss mentioned it, I had to explain that my family was having boundary issues and to please not put any calls through unless someone was actually in the hospital. My sister sent a long email detailing how my behavior was affecting her mental health and how disappointed she was in who I'd become. She said that if I couldn't be the brother she needed, then maybe we shouldn't be siblings at all. The email hurt, but it also clarified something important. She didn't want a brother. She wanted a financial safety net that occasionally showed up to family functions. The final straw came 2 weeks later. My uncle called from my old number, saying he'd co-signed a loan for his son and needed $3,000 to make the payment or risk ruining his credit. This was exactly the kind of emergency that my family had trained me to respond to immediately, no questions asked. Instead, I asked him why he'd co-signed a loan he couldn't afford to pay. I asked him what his plan was for next month's payment. I asked him if he'd considered that maybe his son needed to face the consequences of his poor financial decisions. He called me selfish and hung up. But here's the thing, I didn't feel selfish. I felt free. 6 months later, I'm living a completely different life. I've paid off my student loans early. I'm saving for a house. I've taken up hobbies I couldn't afford before because every spare dollar was going to family emergencies. I sleep better at night because I'm not constantly worried about the next financial crisis I'll be expected to solve. My family barely speaks to me now. The few interactions we have are cold and formal, usually around holidays when someone feels obligated to include me in group plans. But there's no more pressure, no more guilt trips, no more emergencies that somehow become my responsibility to fix. I miss what I thought we had, but I don't miss what we actually had. I don't miss being valued only for my wallet. I don't miss the anxiety of never knowing when the next expensive request would come. I don't miss pretending that being financially responsible made me obligated to subsidize everyone else's choices. That dinner bill was the best money I never spent. Walking away from that table taught me something invaluable. You can't buy love, and you shouldn't have to rent respect from your own family. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling people to take advantage of you. Sometimes standing up for yourself feels like betrayal, but it's actually just self-respect finally finding its voice. I'm 32 years old, financially independent, and learning to build relationships based on mutual care rather than financial dependency. It's lonely sometimes, but it's genuine in a way my family relationships never were. And you know what? I'm okay with that.